Talk to me like that again. I dare you.
Talk to me like that again. Rebecca's voice was low, steady, almost gentle. I dare you. The dining room went dead. Not quiet. Dead. 20 of Seoul's most feared men who had watched people beg for their lives without flinching, men who had made entire families disappear before breakfast. Every single one of them stopped breathing at the exact same second. Because nobody spoke to Park Jang-min like that. Nobody. Not his enemies. Not his allies. Not the politicians who owed him favors or the police chiefs who cashed his checks every month. Not even the men who had known him since he was 17 and already terrifying. In this world, in this city, in this particular room, Park Jang-min's words were law. His tone was final. His displeasure was something you prayed never landed on you. And this woman in a black maid's uniform, holding a serving tray, standing in the middle of his dining room, had just dared him. The air in the room shifted. One of his lieutenants, a thick-necked man named Choi, took a slow step forward from the wall. His hand moved instinctively toward his jacket. Another man near the window straightened, jaw tight, eyes locked on Rebecca like she was already a problem that needed solving. But Park Jang-min raised one finger. Just one. And every single person in that room went completely still. He didn't look at them. He didn't take his eyes off Rebecca. He sat back slowly in his chair, tilted his head exactly 1 degree to the right, and studied her the way a man studies something he has never seen before in his life and isn't entirely sure is real. The seconds stretched. Rebecca didn't look away. Her chest rose and fell with calm, even breaths. Her grip on the tray didn't tighten. Her jaw didn't tremble. She held his gaze with the kind of steadiness that isn't performed, the kind that only comes from a woman who has already survived the worst thing that could happen to her and decided, somewhere along the way, that she would never shrink for anyone again. Park Jang-min's expression didn't crack. It never did. But something moved behind his eyes, something nobody in that room could name, because nobody in that room had ever seen it on his face before. He wasn't angry. That was what shook them. Choi's hand slowly dropped away from his jacket. The man by the window exchanged a glance with the man beside him, a quick, uneasy look that asked a question neither of them could answer. Because rage they understood. Rage was familiar. Rage was Park Jang-min picking up the glass in front of him and putting it through the nearest wall. Rage was the cold, clipped voice that meant someone was not going home tonight. This wasn't rage. This was something quieter. Something that, in its own way, was far more dangerous. Park Jang-min set his glass down on the table with a soft, deliberate click. He leaned forward slightly. And when he finally spoke, his voice was so measured, so controlled, that it almost sounded like a conversation between two reasonable people. "What's your name?" he said. Rebecca blinked once. That was the only sign that the question caught her off guard. "Rebecca," she said. "Sir." He repeated it slowly, like he was tasting it. "Rebecca." A pause. "How long have you worked in this house?" 4 days. 4 days. He nodded once, almost to himself. Then he picked up his glass again, looked down at it briefly, and said, "You either have no idea who I am." He looked back up. "Or you know exactly who I am and you've decided it doesn't matter." Rebecca said nothing. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something smaller than that. Something that made Choi, standing against the wall, feel a cold thread of unease move through his chest that he couldn't explain and wouldn't repeat to anyone. "Which one is it?" Park Jang-min asked. "Neither," Rebecca said quietly. "I just don't let anyone speak to me the way you just did." "Sir." Another silence. Then Park Jang-min did something that would be discussed in whispers among his staff for weeks afterward. He looked down at the table. He exhaled once through his nose. And he said, to no one in particular, everyone out. Nobody moved for a half second, because the order was so unexpected that their bodies needed a moment to process it. Then chairs scraped, footsteps shuffled, and 20 men filed out of that dining room with the focused, eyes forward energy of people who desperately wanted to be somewhere else. Choi was the last one to the door. He paused in the frame, one hand on the wood, and looked back at Rebecca with an expression that was equal parts warning and something close to pity. She didn't look at him. The door closed, and Rebecca was alone in the room with Park Jang-min. If your heart is already racing, you're exactly where this story needs you. Because what happened in that room after everyone left? That is where everything began. And nothing about what follows is what you think. Before we go further, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now because this channel is where stories like this live. And smash that like button so this story reaches someone who needs it tonight. The room felt different with just the two of them in it. Bigger somehow. And yet suffocating at the same time. Rebecca stayed where she was, tray still in her hands, spine straight, eyes forward. She had made a calculation the moment the last man walked out that door, that showing any sign of discomfort right now would be the most dangerous thing she could do. So she stood. And she waited. Park Jang-min rose from his chair. He wasn't a physically overwhelming man in the way people expected powerful men to be. He wasn't built like a wall or draped in obvious muscle. He was lean, composed, and moved with the kind of deliberate quietness that made you realize, watching him, that he had never needed size to be the most dangerous person in any room he walked into. Power, on him, was not a performance. It was simply a fact. He walked slowly around the far side of the table, hands clasped behind his back, and stopped a few feet from where she stood. He looked at her the way someone looks at a painting they can't quite interpret. Not with hostility. With genuine, focused curiosity. Put the tray down, he said. Rebecca set it on the edge of the table beside her. Carefully. Without rushing. You're not afraid of me, he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't say that, Rebecca replied. Something shifted in his expression. Then you are afraid. I said I didn't say that, she repeated, meeting his eyes. I'm not afraid and I'm not afraid. I just don't think fear is the most useful thing I can be right now. Park Jang-min studied her for a long moment. Where are you from? Nigeria, she said. Originally. And before this house? I worked for a hospitality firm. They placed me here. I know where they placed you from, he said quietly. I'm asking about before. Before the firm. Before Seoul. What made you, Rebecca? He said her name the same way he had said it the first time, slowly, deliberately, like he was memorizing the shape of it. Rebecca felt something tighten in her chest. She kept her face smooth. That's a personal question, sir. Yes, he agreed. It is. He wasn't going to apologize for it. That much was clear. He waited with the patience of a man who had learned, long ago, that silence was the most effective pressure in any conversation. Rebecca exhaled once through her nose. I grew up in Lagos. Moved to London at 19. Worked there for 6 years. Then the firm brought me here. That's a resume, Park Jang-min said. I asked what made you. The words landed somewhere deep and unexpected. Rebecca looked at him, really looked at him for a half second in a way she hadn't allowed herself to do yet, and felt the strange, uncomfortable sensation of being seen by someone she had not given permission to look. Hard things, she said finally. Hard things made me. He nodded once, slowly. Like that answer satisfied something in him. Hard things made me too, he said. And for just a moment, the briefest fracture of a moment, something human moved across his face. Something tired. Something old. Then it was gone. He turned and walked back toward his chair. You'll continue your duties, he said, his voice back to its clipped, neutral register. But you will not be reassigned to the lower floors anymore. You work this floor. My floor. Starting tomorrow. Rebecca blinked. I'm sorry? You heard me. Sir, with respect, that's not standard placement for someone 4 days into. Rebecca. He sat down, picked up his glass, and looked at her with an expression that was neither warm nor cold. Simply final. I don't do standard. She pressed her lips together, picked up her tray, and walked toward the door. One more thing, his voice stopped her just before she reached it. She turned. The next time you dare someone in this house, he said, make sure you're prepared for them to take you up on it. Rebecca looked at him for one long, steady beat. The next time someone in this house speaks to me like I'm less than human, she said quietly, make sure they're prepared for the same. She walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. Park Jang-min sat alone in the silence of that dining room for a full minute without moving. Then he picked up his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. It rang twice before a voice answered. Find out everything about the woman the agency sent, he said. Rebecca. Nigerian. Spent 6 years in London before coming here. A pause. Everything. I want it by morning. He hung up, set the phone down, and looked at the door she had just walked through with that same expression, the one his men couldn't name and couldn't forget. Outside in the corridor, Rebecca walked at a perfectly even pace until she turned the corner past the second door. Then she stopped, pressed her back against the wall, closed her eyes. Her hands, hidden now from any camera, were shaking slightly. Not from fear. From the effort of controlling everything she had just held together in that room. From the weight of standing in front of a man like Park Jang-min and not letting a single crack show. From the knowledge of what she was really doing in that house and how catastrophically sideways it could go if he found out before she was ready. She pressed her palm flat against the wall, steadied her breath, and made herself a promise she had made before, in harder moments than this one. Hold it together. Just a little longer. She pushed off the wall and kept walking. That shaking hand tells you everything about Rebecca that her face refused to show in that room. She is not fearless. She is disciplined. And there is a very big difference between those two things. Now you have to ask yourself, what is she really doing in that house? Drop your theories in the comments right now because some of you are going to guess it and I want to see who. And where in the world you are watching from, I read every single comment. Like this video if Rebecca just earned your respect. Subscribe if you are not leaving until the story is finished. Rebecca's room in the staff quarters was small. A single bed, a narrow wardrobe, a window that looked out onto the estate's east garden. Nothing on the walls. Nothing personal on the surfaces. She had learned a long time ago not to leave traces of herself in places she wasn't planning to stay. She sat on the edge of the bed that night, phone pressed to her ear, and waited through 2 rings before the voice on the other end picked up. Talk to me, the voice said. Male. Clipped. Professional. I've been moved to his floor, Rebecca said quietly. Direct access. Starting tomorrow. A pause on the other end. Then, that's faster than we expected. Yes, Rebecca said. It is. Does he suspect anything? She thought about the way Park Jang-min had looked at her across that dining room. The way he had said find out everything into a phone she wasn't supposed to know about. The way his eyes had held hers like he was already solving a puzzle he hadn't fully named yet. Not yet, she said. But he's sharp. Sharper than the briefing made him sound. You knew going in that he wasn't ordinary. There's a difference between knowing something and standing in front of it, Rebecca said. Her voice stayed even. Barely. The man on the other end was quiet for a moment. His name was Deo. He was her handler, her contact, and the closest thing she had left to someone who knew her full story. They had worked together for 3 years. He knew when she was holding something back. Rebecca, he said carefully. Are you solid? I'm always solid. That's not what I asked. She closed her eyes briefly. Opened them. I'm solid, Deo. I just need more time on his floor before I can access the East Wing office. The files we need are in there. Give me 2 weeks. You have 10 days, Deo said. After that the window closes and everything we've built toward this gets buried. You understand what's at stake. She understood. She had understood for 18 months, ever since the night she sat in a small office in London and was shown a photograph that changed the entire direction of her life. A photograph of a shipping manifest. A list of names. And at the bottom of that list, a name she recognized. A name that had no business being connected to the kind of cargo that manifest described. Her brother's name. Claude. 23 years old. Smart, funny, the kind of person who lit up a room just by walking into it. Gone for 14 months with no word, no trace, no body. The police in Lagos had written him off in 6 weeks. Interpol had a file that hadn't been touched in 8. But Rebecca had kept pulling threads, kept pushing doors, kept asking questions in places where questions made people nervous. And every thread, every door, every nervous silence had eventually led her here. To Seoul. To this estate. To Park Jang-min. She didn't know yet if he was the man who had taken Claude. She didn't know if Claude was even still alive. What she knew was that somewhere inside the East Wing office of this estate was a server that held records, financial transfers, shipping coordinates, names that would either give her answers or give her nothing. Either way, she needed to get inside that room. 10 days, she said into the phone. I'll have what we need. She hung up, sat in the silence of her small room, and let herself feel, for exactly 60 seconds, the full weight of everything she was carrying. The grief that lived permanently just below her sternum. The fear she had trained herself not to show. The loneliness of being this deep inside, something with no one beside her except a voice on a phone. 60 seconds. Then she packed it all back down, lay back on the narrow bed, and stared at the ceiling. In the morning she had a job to do. She reported to his floor at 6:45. The corridor was already alive with quiet, controlled movement. 2 security personnel at the far end. A housekeeper moving efficiently between rooms. A man Rebecca hadn't seen before standing outside the door to Park Jang-min's private office, arms crossed, eyes forward, with the specific stillness of someone whose entire job was to make sure that door stayed closed. Rebecca noted everything. She always did. She had been given a list of her duties by the head of household staff, a small precise woman named Mrs. O, who had delivered the instructions with the warmth of someone reading from a legal document. Morning service on his floor. Meals brought up when requested. His private sitting room maintained between 8 and 9 a.m. while he was in his morning meetings. Absolutely no entry to the East Wing office under any circumstances. Mrs. O had looked at her when she said that last part. Long enough to make sure it landed. Understood, Rebecca had said pleasantly. Now she moved through the morning routine with smooth efficiency, learning the rhythm of the floor, clocking the patterns of the security rotation, noting which camera covered which angle and where the blind spots fell. She was good at this. She had trained for it. But training and doing were always two different weights, and today the weight was heavier than usual because at 8:17, the door at the end of the corridor opened. And Park Jang-min walked out. He was in a dark suit, phone in hand, already mid-conversation in Korean that was too fast and too low for Rebecca to fully follow from where she stood. He didn't look up as he moved down the corridor. He walked straight past her. And then, without breaking stride, without looking up from his phone, he said, "Good morning, Rebecca." She kept her hands steady on the tray she was carrying. "Good morning, sir." He turned the corner and was gone. Rebecca stood there for half a second longer than she intended. He had known exactly where she was in that corridor without looking up once. That told her something she needed to remember every single day she spent inside this house. Park Jang-min was not a man who missed things. He was a man who chose what to reveal and what to quietly file away for later. She was going to have to be better than good. She was going to have to be perfect. She thought she was watching him. She had no idea he was already watching her back and had been since the moment she walked through his front door. What do you think Park Jang-min already knows about Rebecca? Drop it in the comments. This story is about to get a lot more complicated. If this has had you leaning forward, hit that like button right now. 3 days passed. Rebecca learned the floor the way she learned everything, methodically, quietly, without drawing attention to the process. She mapped the security rotation in her head until she could recite it backward. She noted that the guard outside the East Wing office changed at 9 a.m., at 2 p.m., and at 10 p.m. She noted that the window between the 9 a.m. change and the arrival of the second guard was approximately 4 minutes, long enough, if everything else aligned perfectly, for someone who knew what they were doing to move through that door undetected. She noted that Park Jang-min took his coffee black, no sugar, and that he drank it standing at the window of his sitting room every morning at exactly 8:50, looking out over the city like a man who owned it. Because he did. She noted that he rarely raised his voice. That his instructions were always precise and always final. That the people around him operated on a frequency of controlled anxiety, always performing competence, always aware of his presence, always angled slightly toward him the way plants angle toward light. Except that light, in this case, could also burn. She noted that he watched her. Not obviously. Not in a way that anyone else in that corridor would catch. But she felt it, the particular quality of attention that has weight to it, that lands on you like a hand on your shoulder even from across a room. She had felt it from day one. By day 3 it was unmistakable. On the 4th morning, she was straightening the far end of his sitting room when he walked in 20 minutes earlier than his usual time. She didn't turn around immediately. She finished what she was doing, set the cloth down, and turned to find him standing in the center of the room watching her with that expression she was beginning to recognize, the one that gave nothing away and took everything in. "You're early," she said. "It's my house," he replied. "I'll be out of your way in a moment." "I didn't ask you to leave." Rebecca looked at him. He had his jacket off, collar open at the top button, and there was something about seeing him like that, fractionally less armored than usual, that made the air between them feel different. She didn't examine that feeling. She filed it under dangerous and kept her face neutral. He walked to the window. Looked out. "How are you finding the work?" "It's work," she said. "I find it fine. Mrs. O says you're efficient." "Mrs. O doesn't look like a woman who gives compliments easily," Rebecca said. "So I'll take that." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "She doesn't," he agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "Then, you grew up in Lagos." It wasn't a question this time. He had clearly received whatever information he had sent for. Rebecca felt the air shift, but kept her body language completely still. "Yes," she said. "Rough city," he said. Not unkindly. Just factually. "Every city is rough if you're in the wrong part of it," she replied. "Lagos just doesn't hide it as neatly as other places do." He turned from the window then and looked at her directly. "Do you have family there?" The word family landed on Rebecca's chest like a stone dropped from a height. For exactly 1/2 second something moved across her face, something she couldn't fully suppress no matter how trained she was before she smoothed it back down. But he saw it. She knew he saw it because his expression changed. Just slightly. Just enough. "Some," she said carefully. "Not many." He studied her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he turned back to the window. "Family is a complicated thing," he said quietly. Almost to himself. "The people we come from. What we carry because of them. What we do because of them." Rebecca looked at the back of his head and felt something strange move through her. Because there was something in the way he said those words, not performed, not calculated, just said, like they came from somewhere real and unguarded, that made her remember, against her will, that the man she was investigating was still a man. She didn't want to remember that. It made everything harder. "I should finish the other rooms," she said, moving toward the door. "Rebecca." She stopped. The scar on your left wrist, he said, still looking out the window. How did you get it? The question hit her like cold water. Her left wrist. She had been careful. She wore her sleeves at the right length. But 3 days ago in the kitchen, she had reached across a high shelf and her sleeve had ridden up for maybe 2 seconds. 2 seconds. And he had been in the kitchen doorway for exactly that long. She had clocked him. She had thought he hadn't clocked her. She had been wrong. An accident, she said. A long time ago. He nodded once. Didn't push. You can go. She walked out. In the corridor, she moved at her usual pace, turned the corner, and pulled out her phone. She typed a message to Deo that was 6 words long. He's already had me investigated. Careful. Deo's reply came back in under a minute. How much does he know? Rebecca looked at the message. Thought about the way Park Jang-min had said her name in that sitting room. The way he had asked about her family with something that sounded almost like recognition. The way he had seen a 2-second glimpse of her wrist 3 days ago and held it quietly, said nothing and waited. She typed back. I don't know yet. But he's not asking questions he doesn't already have answers to. She put her phone away. Down the corridor, behind the closed door of his sitting room, Park Jang-min stood at his window and read through the file on his phone that his man had compiled. Lagos. London. 6 years of clean, verifiable employment history. A brother, Khalad Adeyemi, reported missing 14 months ago. He scrolled to the bottom of the file. Read the last line. And went completely still. Because the last line connected Khalad Adeyemi's disappearance to a shipping operation. A specific shipping operation. One that ran out of a port in Busan. One that Park Jang-min knew about because 3 years ago, before he had dismantled it piece by piece, it had belonged to him. He set the phone down on the windowsill, looked out over the city, and said nothing for a very long time. He knows. She doesn't know he knows. And somewhere between those two facts, this story is about to explode. Tell me in the comments, do you think Park Jang-min had something to do with Khalad's disappearance? The 10th day arrived faster than Rebecca had planned for. Not because time had moved quickly. If anything, every hour inside that estate felt like it had been stretched and examined and handed back to her heavier than before. It arrived fast because she had spent 9 days being careful, being measured, being patient and patience, when the thing you are waiting for is the truth about your missing brother. Has a limit that lives somewhere just below your ribs and makes itself known at 3 in the morning when the house is quiet and your mind refuses to stop. She had the window mapped. For minutes between guard changes at the East Wing office. 9 a.m. She had the tools she needed, small and unremarkable, tucked inside the lining of her uniform bag. She had run the plan in her head so many times it felt less like a plan and more like a memory of something that had already happened. What she hadn't planned for was Park Jang-min not leaving for his morning meetings. She found out at 8:40 when Mrs. O appeared in the corridor with her clipboard and her expression that never changed and informed the floor staff that Mr. Park would be conducting business from the estate today. All common areas to remain clear between 9 and 11. No interruptions unless summoned. Rebecca stood in the corridor after Mrs. O walked away and felt the plan she had built dissolve quietly in her hands. She had 1 day left. She went back to work and spent the next hour thinking. By 9:15, she had a new plan. It was riskier. It required her to be in 2 places at once in a way that would only work if every variable cooperated simultaneously. But it was the only door still open, and she had learned a long time ago that when there is only one door, you don't stand outside it debating. You walk through. She prepared his mid-morning coffee, carried it to his sitting room, knocked. Come in. He was at the desk this time, not the window. Documents spread in front of him, jacket back on, fully composed. 2 phones face down on the desk beside him. The energy in the room was different from the mornings she had grown used to, more compressed, more alert. Whatever business he was conducting today had weight to it. She set the coffee down beside him without a word and turned to leave. Close the door, he said, without looking up. She closed it, stood with her back to it, waiting to be dismissed. He signed something, set the pen down, picked up the coffee, drank, and then, still not looking at her, said, Khalad Adeyemi. The name hit her like a physical thing. Every carefully constructed wall inside Rebecca's chest cracked simultaneously. She felt the blood leave her face and then rush back. Felt her hands go ice cold inside her sleeves. Felt the specific, nauseating sensation of a plan falling apart in real time. She said nothing. Park Jang-min set the cup down, looked up, and for the first time since she had met him, his expression wasn't composed. It wasn't cold or neutral or unreadable. It was something else entirely. Something that looked, underneath everything, like the weight of a man carrying something he had been carrying for a very long time. Sit down, Rebecca, he said. I'd rather stand, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "Sit down," he said again. Not harshly. Almost gently. "Please." The please was what undid her. Because Park Jang-min did not say please. She had spent 10 days in this house, and she had never once heard that word come out of his mouth. She sat. He leaned back in his chair and looked at her for a long moment. "How long have you known that your brother's disappearance was connected to this house?" Rebecca looked at him. Calculated quickly. Lying was no longer an option. He had already crossed that line for her by saying Khalad's name. All she had left was controlled honesty. 18 months, she said. Give or take. He nodded slowly. "And you came here to find proof." "I came here to find my brother," she said. And her voice on those last 3 words did something she had not permitted it to do in 18 months. It cracked. Just slightly. Just enough for both of them to hear it. Park Jang-min looked at the desk. Was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The operation that took your brother. The shipping network out of Busan." He paused. "I didn't take him, Rebecca." She stared at him. "That network operated under my organization 3 years ago," he said, his voice measured and even. "Before I found out what it was being used for. What they were moving." Something hardened in his jaw. "I shut it down. Personally. I removed everyone connected to it, and I dismantled every route it ran. What happened after that, the people who rebuilt it under different ownership, that was no longer my operation." "You expect me to believe that?" Rebecca said. Flat. Careful. "No," he said simply. "I expect you to verify it. Which is why I'm going to give you access to the East Wing office." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Rebecca had ever sat inside. "The files you need are on the server," he continued. "Shipping records. Transfer logs. Names. Everything that connects your brother's disappearance to the people who rebuilt that network after I shut it down." He looked at her steadily. "I've known those files existed for 8 months. I've been building a case of my own." Rebecca stared at him. "Why?" He held her gaze. "Because the man who rebuilt that network after I dismantled it," he said quietly, "used my name to do it. Used my reputation. Moved product under my flag without my knowledge." His voice dropped half a register. "And because one of the names on that shipping manifest is someone I trusted." He picked up his pen. Set it back down. "I have my own reasons for wanting this finished," he said. "It appears we may want the same thing." Everything Rebecca thought she knew just rearranged itself. And everything Park Jang-min just revealed tells you that this man is not who anyone in that room, or watching this video, believed he was. Do you trust him? Because Rebecca isn't sure she does. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. I want to know if you believe Park Jang-min or if you think this is the most dangerous thing he's said yet. Rebecca sat in that chair for a long time after Park Jang-min stopped talking. Not because she had nothing to say. Because she had too much and none of it was safe to release in this room, in front of this man, at this particular moment. She had spent 18 months building walls around everything she felt about Khalad, the grief, the guilt, the rage that lived underneath both of them like an engine that never switched off. She had built those walls because they were the only thing keeping her functional. And right now, every single one of them was vibrating. "You said you've been building a case," she said finally. "For 8 months. Yes. And in 8 months, you didn't go to the authorities." Park Jang-min looked at her with an expression that said, quietly and without cruelty, that she already knew the answer to that question. She did. Men like him didn't go to authorities. Authorities went to men like him, usually with their hands out. "The man who rebuilt that network," she said carefully. "The one who used your name. Who is he?" Park Jang-min was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "His name is Shin Woo-jin. He ran logistics for my organization for 6 years. I trusted him with things I trusted very few people with." A pause. "That trust was a mistake I intend to correct." "Correct how?" Rebecca asked. "The files in that office connect Shin directly to 17 illegal shipments over the past 2 years," Park Jang-min said. "Human cargo. Across 4 countries. Your brother was taken during the 3rd shipment." His voice stayed even as he said it, but something in his eyes went very dark. "I don't move people, Rebecca. I never have. It is the one line I drew when I built this organization, and it is the one line I have never crossed. What Shin did, what he did under my name, is something I will not leave unanswered." Rebecca absorbed this. Every word. Every inflection. She was looking for the lie in it, the angle, the manipulation, the place where a man like Park Jang-min turned a truth into a tool. She was good at finding those places. She had trained for it. She couldn't find it. That scared her more than the alternative would have. "You said one of the names on the manifest is someone you trusted," she said slowly. "You just told me that was Shin." "Shin is one name," Park Jang-min said. "There is another." Rebecca went still. He reached into the drawer of his desk and produced a single printed page. He slid it across the desk toward her. She looked at it without touching it first, old habit, then picked it up. It was a shipping manifest. The same format she had seen in the photograph Deo had shown her 18 months ago in that London office. Column after column of cargo codes, coordinates, dates. And at the bottom, 2 signatures. The first was Shinwoo Jeans. The second made Rebecca's vision blur at the edges for exactly 3 seconds before she pulled it back. She knew the second name. She knew it because she had worked alongside him for 2 years. Because he had recruited her for this mission. Because he had been the one to show her the original photograph and point her toward Seoul and tell her, with complete conviction, that Park Jang-min was the man responsible for her brother's disappearance. Deo. Her handler. Her contact. The closest thing she had left to someone she trusted. His signature was at the bottom of a manifest that listed human cargo, including one entry, 14 months ago, that corresponded exactly to the week Claude had vanished. Rebecca set the paper down on the desk. She was aware, distantly, that her hands were completely steady. She found that remarkable. She found it remarkable the way you find things remarkable when the alternative to being steady is falling apart entirely, and falling apart is not something you can afford to do right now. How long have you known his name was on this? She asked. 3 weeks, Park Jang-min said. And you didn't, she stopped. Reorganized. You knew I was connected to him. I suspected, he said. When my man pulled your background and found the connection to your brother's case, I started looking at who else had been investigating the same network. Your handler's name surfaced. He paused. I didn't know how deeply you were aware of his involvement. I still don't. Rebecca looked at him. I wasn't aware at all, she said. The words came out quiet and stripped of everything except the truth. I had no idea. Park Jang-min looked at her for a long moment. And something in his expression, just briefly, just for a second, was not the composure of a dangerous man or the calculation of someone playing a long game. It was something closer to recognition. The look of one person who has been betrayed by someone they trusted seeing that exact same thing in someone else. I know, he said quietly. That's why I'm telling you. The room was very still. Rebecca stood up, walked to the window, looked out over the city the way she had watched him look out over it every morning, like the answer to something was out there if you looked long enough. She pressed one hand flat against the glass and let the cold of it travel up through her palm. Claude was out there somewhere. She had to believe that. She had built 18 months on that belief, and she was not dismantling it now. The files in that office, she said without turning around. Can they bring Shin down? And Deo? With the right people handling them, Park Jang-min said. Yes. And Claude? Her voice stayed even. Barely. Is there anything in those files that tells us where he is? The pause before he answered was 3 seconds long. She counted every one. There are coordinates, he said, for a holding location in Thailand. Used during that third shipment. Another pause. The location was last logged as active 4 months ago. Rebecca closed her eyes. 4 months ago. Active. Which meant there was still a thread. Still a possibility. Still something to run toward instead of away from. She turned around. Looked at Park Jang-min across the room. And for the first time since she had walked into this estate, she let him see something real on her face. Not the steadiness. Not the composure. The thing underneath all of it, the love of a sister who had refused for 14 months to stop looking. I need to get into that office, she said. Park Jang-min stood up, reached into his jacket pocket, and placed a key card on the desk between them. I know, he said. Deo. The man who sent her here. The man who showed her the photograph. The man who told her Park Jang-min was the enemy. His name was on that manifest the whole time. How does that betrayal hit you? Drop it in the comments, because I know some of you felt that. Every thread. Every secret. Every unanswered question. If you have watched this far, hit that like button right now. You have earned the ending. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one again. The East Wing office smelled like old paper and something metallic that Rebecca couldn't name but recognized instinctively as the smell of serious money and serious decisions made in the same room over a long period of time. She stood inside it for exactly 2 seconds taking it in. Then she moved. The server was where Park Jang-min had told her it would be, a sleek black unit mounted flush against the far wall behind a panel that looked like decorative casing until you knew what you were looking for. She connected her drive, entered the access code he had written on a small card and placed beside the key card on that desk, and watched the transfer bar begin its slow crawl across the screen. 40%. 50. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. Deo. Check in. Where are we? Rebecca stared at the message. Felt the specific cold that comes not from temperature, but from looking at something familiar and seeing it differently for the first time, seeing the shape of what it actually was underneath what you believed it to be. She didn't reply. 60%. 70. Her phone buzzed again. Rebecca. Check in now. She turned the phone face down on the desk beside her and watched the transfer bar. 80%. The door behind her opened. She spun around. Her hand moved instinctively, reaching for something that wasn't there, a reflex from a version of herself that had trained for exactly this kind of moment. But it wasn't a threat that walked through the door. It was Park Jang-min, jacket off, moving quickly, with an expression on his face she hadn't seen before. Urgency. We have a problem, he said. The transfer is at 80%, she said. 2 more minutes. We don't have 2 minutes. He crossed the room. Shin knows you're here. Someone tipped him. His eyes moved to her phone on the desk. Then back to her face. How many people knew you were coming into this office today? Rebecca felt the answer arrive before she finished forming the question. 1, she said. Park Jang-min looked at her phone. He didn't just betray me 18 months ago, she said quietly. He's been managing me the whole time, keeping me pointed at you, making sure I never looked at him. And the moment he realized you were no longer pointed at me, Park Jang-min said, he called Shin. 90%. From somewhere below them, deep in the belly of the estate, Rebecca heard something. Low, distant. The kind of sound that a large building makes when its ground floor security has been breached and the men responding to that breach are moving fast. Park Jang-min turned to the door and said something sharp in Korean. The man outside, she hadn't even heard him take position there, responded in 2 words. For men, Park Jang-min translated, turning back to her. East entrance. Armed. 95%. They're not here for the files, Rebecca said, watching the bar. They're here for me. If I'm gone, there's no one to testify. No one to connect Deo to the manifest. The files alone aren't enough without a witness who can establish chain of custody and personal knowledge. I'm aware, Park Jang-min said. He reached into the back of his waistband and placed a gun on the desk beside her drive. Can you use that? She looked at it. Looked at him. Yes. Good. He picked up his own phone. Made a call. 3 words in Korean, then he hung up. My men are moving. But we need to be out of this room in 60 seconds. 100%. Rebecca pulled the drive free, closed the panel, and picked up the gun in one fluid motion. She looked at Park Jang-min. The coordinates in those files. The holding location in Thailand. I have people who can move on it within 24 hours, he said. If we get out of this building, then let's get out of this building. They moved into the corridor together. What followed was 4 minutes that Rebecca would spend years afterward being unable to fully describe in sequence because fear and focus and adrenaline compressed time into something nonlinear that the brain stores in fragments rather than frames. She remembered the stairwell. The sound of voices 2 floors below, urgent and getting closer. Park Jang-min's hand on her arm at the corner, pulling her back a half second before she would have walked into a sight line. The specific silence of a man who had navigated dangerous spaces for 20 years, moving through one now, economical, certain, without a single wasted motion. She remembered a door. Cold air. The estate's rear service exit opening onto a narrow alley where 2 of Park Jang-min's men were already waiting with an engine running. She remembered getting in. She remembered the car moving. And then she remembered exhaling the longest, deepest exhale of her life and pressing the drive in her hand against her chest like it was something living. Shin Woo-jin was arrested by Interpol 48 hours later. The files on that drive, combined with the testimony Rebecca gave to investigators she had spent 18 months learning to trust no one from, built a case that took 11 hours to present and left no exits. Deo was picked up at Incheon Airport trying to board a flight to Dubai. He had a new passport, a new name, and an expression, when they put the cuffs on him, that Rebecca was told about secondhand because she wasn't there. She had chosen not to be. Some endings you don't need to witness in person. Some endings you just need to know happened. The coordinates in the files led investigators to a facility outside Chiang Mai. It had been used as a transit holding location for 4 separate operations over 2 years. Most of the people who had passed through it were ghosts by the time investigators arrived, moved, redistributed, disappeared into other parts of a network that was now being dismantled piece by piece. But not all of them. Khalad Adeyemi was found in a medical facility 30 kilometers from the main site, where he had been receiving treatment for injuries sustained during his detention. He was alive. He was weak. He looked at his sister when she walked through that door and said her name in a voice that was almost unrecognizable, rougher, older, stripped of the easy lightness she remembered. And Rebecca sat beside his bed and held his hand and let herself cry for the first time in 18 months. Not the controlled kind. Not the 60-second kind she allowed herself in small dark rooms. The real kind. The kind that has no time limit and doesn't ask permission. She cried until there was nothing left to cry, and then she sat in the quiet of that room and listened to her brother breathe and felt, for the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, that the ground beneath her feet was solid. 3 weeks later, she was back in Seoul. She wasn't entirely sure why. That was what she told herself on the flight and in the cab from the airport and walking up the street toward the small coffee shop near Gyeongbokgung where she had agreed to meet him. She wasn't sure why. But she showed up. Park Jang-min was already there when she arrived. Sitting at a corner table, jacket on despite the warmth of the room, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, looking entirely too composed for a man sitting in a public place after the week they had both just survived. He looked up when she walked in. Said nothing. Just watched her cross the room and sit down across from him. The server came. She ordered coffee. Black, no sugar. She didn't realize she had ordered it exactly the way he took his until the cup arrived and she saw the corner of his mouth move. You came back, he said. I came back, she agreed. A pause. How is he? Park Jang-min asked. Healing, she said. Slowly. But healing. She wrapped her hands around her cup. He asked me about you actually. About the man whose house I was working in. I didn't know what to tell him. What did you say? Rebecca looked at Park Jang-min across the small table. At the composed face that she now knew had cracks in it, specific, human cracks that he chose carefully who got to see. At the man who had handed her a key card and a gun and moved through a dangerous building beside her without once asking her to stay behind. At the person who, somewhere between a dining room confrontation and a rear service exit, had become something she didn't have a clean word for yet. I told him the truth, she said. That it was complicated. Park Jang-min looked at her. And this time he didn't suppress whatever moved across his face. He let it sit there, quiet, warm, and entirely real. Complicated, he repeated. Complicated, she confirmed. Outside the coffee shop window, Seoul moved in its relentless, indifferent way, millions of lives running parallel to each other, intersecting briefly and then diverging, carrying their histories and their secrets and their grief and their hope all at once. Rebecca drank her coffee. Park Jang-min drank his. And in the particular silence between two people who have seen each other at their most exposed and chosen to sit down anyway, there was something that felt, against all reasonable expectation, like the beginning of something. And that is where we leave them. Not with a perfect ending. Not with all wounds healed or all questions answered. But with a brother breathing in a hospital bed 30 kilometers from Chiang Mai. With a woman who refused to stop looking finally having something to show for it. And with two people sitting across a small table in Seoul who should never have ended up together. If this story moved you, if Rebecca stayed with you, if Park Jang-min surprised you, if Daeo's betrayal hit you somewhere real, tell me in the comments which moment got you the most. I read every single one and I want to know. If you watched this entire story from beginning to end, you're exactly the kind of person this channel was built for. Hit that like button. Leave a comment. And subscribe right now because there are more stories like this one coming. Stories that will keep you here until the very last word every single time. Where are you watching this from? Drop your country or city in the comments. This story just traveled across the world, and I want to see how far. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next one.